Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm George Moss again here at allpointstv.com, and we are happy as always to have you with us 3 days before Thanksgiving. And I don't know how your Thanksgiving is going to go or what you have planned for it. Hopefully you will have family and friends over and you'll have a wonderful Thanksgiving. That this is the holiday that I get the best meal of the year. And I'll have John. I got to bring you a plate.
Yeah, you did that last year. That was really nice. You had you had that. You're gonna have turkey or ham this year.
I'm gonna have turkey.
Yeah, I like turkey.
Yeah, I got to bring you a plate over here because you know what? I get 3 meals a year.
Yeah, you brought that over last year, and I had friends stop over my house, and we had the dinner, and you brought it over, and it was like, well, okay, I'll have another dinner. I was like,
I'll bring you a plate over because we have the best. We have the best dressing in town, probably in the state.
You did. That's really good to tell you. I'll test to that. It's really good.
I'll tell you that we're going to have a pretty good meal here, and I've got to go to the store. As a matter of fact, when I leave the studio today. But I hope everybody out there in the listenership will have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and you deserve it. And get with family and friends and appreciate all that you have to be thankful for. And I don't care how bad things get. There's something that we can look at and say, okay, that's a good thing, and just be thankful for the small things sometimes. Everybody has something to be thankful for. And so I'm thankful for the fact that I will have a meal that I don't have to cook. I do the cooking. And hopefully
you do cooking during the week or normally?
When we go through the kitchen, we go in through the kitchen to the family room to watch television. And there's not a whole lot that goes on in our kitchen. We go out for we go out for breakfast and dinner and those kinds of things. We don't do a whole lot of cooking at the house. And you ought to see my bill at the end of the month.
It's cheaper but sometimes for two people like you and your wife, I mean, it's probably just cheaper to go out to eat though. Sometimes it really is.
It is, and we like to. I spend a lot of time on the internet, and I'm reading, and so we put our time in other things, and we have hobbies and we have dog shows. I have 2 dogs. So when it comes down to being in that kitchen and spending 2 or 3 hours in the kitchen a day with breakfast and dinner and those kinds of things, we're not doing too much of that. And my bill, you ought to see my bill at the end of the month. I've got to find a better way. But this is going to be a great week for us, and we're looking forward to it.
Don't go to Cece's, pizza place. You ever been there?
I haven't been there, but
it's only $5-6, and it's like you have to bust your own table now. They eliminated people who used to pick up your plates and stuff, because it's a buffet style. Not the greatest pizza in the world, but if you're putting a lot of feed on for a lot of people, it's really inexpensive. I mean, you could feed last time I went there, it was like 3 people ate there. It was like $20.
Where's Cece's located?
The one we have is in Grand Blanc out there, next to where the Walmart is. It's one of the strip malls next to the property adjacent to the Walmart out there. So you want the Walmart out in
Cece's, okay.
Cece's, yeah, CICI. CICI, I think it is. CICI.
Okay, I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, it's really cheap. It's like $5 a person,
$6 a person. We're looking for a good place to go.
Which is cheaper than McDonald's, by the way.
I'll tell you, we go to all the restaurants, and so we're looking for some new restaurants to go to. Okay, we're going to be looking forward to Thanksgiving on Thursday. We're going to be talking about a few things here today on the program. Want to welcome all of the listeners at allpointstv.com and also the listeners at 92.1 on WFOV. That's the radio station that does a repeat of the program on Saturdays at 12 o'clock, and we are very happy that they are taking up the program here at allpointstv.com. They have some excellent programs over there. I hope you'll pay attention to all the programs on that particular network, and we are working in concert with each other, and hopefully we can continue to do our part to make this experiment work.
Speaking of concert, too, a lot of times they have jazz musicians on WFOV. So if you're a jazz enthusiast, tune in. You can sign up for when they go live, or whatever, or what's going on with it, and those you can see their schedule. But they do have a few jazz programs.
Yeah, I was listening to one on Saturday. They had what they call the Jazzercise. And that was a very good program. I like the way they do their format too. They will break from the music, and they'll do a program, and then they'll come back to the program, and they do that with this program as well. They'll during those 4-minute breaks we take here, they will sometimes inject some musical to break the dialogue up and come back to the program. It's well formatted, and there are some excellent programs on that network. One of my favorite, and they all are good, but one of my favorite is the Tom Sumner show that comes on from 9 to 12. I said 9 to 3 last week, but I was mistaken. It's 9 to 12, 5 days a week, and that's an excellent program with some of my favorite persons. Tom Sumner is one of my favorite persons, and so is Paul Rozicki, and my favorite of favorites is Henry Hatter, whom I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and we have him here sometimes at the studio, and we do programs here together.
Your friend Barry Simon, he's on vacation down there, and he's a snowbird. I guess he's down in Florida. So
he left us, didn't he? I think Barry's in Florida now.
Yeah, that's right. He posts on Facebook, So
yeah, John, do you know I'm banned off Facebook now?
Still banned.
That's been 30 days. It was 30 days yesterday.
Yep.
But I'm going to trick him today. I have a friend that's going to post part 2 of the narrative that they objected to. I did part 1 on the 19th of October.
I've seen people post, pornography on Facebook, and I don't think they got banned.
Yeah,
but you got banned.
I don't feel as badly about it when I understand that on Twitter they banned the president for 11 minutes. Can you believe that? The president of the United States was banned, and even his narrative was taken down by these kooks.
I mean, there is no First Amendment, and that's the reason why I think I'll put it out there. Hey, people, people are really genuinely interested in dialogue, and not just. I don't want a partisan. I just want people who actually are rational people. I'd like to see if we could start a social media group of our own, that would rival Facebook eventually. Because Facebook is good. They got a niche going on. And let's face it, they got us by the short and curlies. The way, but I think there's always room for competition, and if we could start that going on,
John, I like to see another network set up because their censorship policies are very troublesome. That article that I wrote on the 19th of October was not that controversial.
What was that on? That may be a good thing to go over.
I did a post. I take exception to this noise we're making about racism being the bugaboo that is the major impediment that's stopping blacks from going forward. I think that the application of that would have been more so the case in our grandparents' day. That is not the problem, the major problem that's stopping blacks from going forward in the country today. I would put that upon upon liberalism as the problem, and I made a case for it in part 2, and I took it back to Frederick Douglass. I think that's what Frederick Douglass was saying on July the 4th, 1852, when he said, "What is your 4th of July to blacks?" And he was saying, they're asking the question, what should we do with blacks? And his point was that you do nothing with blacks. It's your doing with them that has caused the condition that they're in. And he is saying that because he had broken with William Lloyd Garrison, who was his mentor from 1841 when the two men met in Massachusetts. And from 1841 to 1847, everything was going pretty well between the two of them. But Douglass found his own voice when he found his own paper 16 years after the Liberator, which is the paper that was founded. William Lloyd Garrison had found it. And when Douglass founded his own paper 16 years later called the North Star and found his own voice, then because he was not any longer parroting what William Lloyd Garrison said, the two men fell out. And Douglass will change the name of his paper because it's no longer being financed by William Lloyd Garrison, and the two men fell out in 1851. So in 1852, Douglass is founding another paper called Douglass's Paper, Frederick Douglass's Paper. And in 52, he is now saying, do nothing with us. And I think that this is a rejection on Douglass' part of liberalism, because in liberalism, there's a tremendous amount of paternalism that's found in it, that people want to be the spokesperson for blacks, who want to be the saviors. This paternalism.
That's why I always found kind of galling, because I used to argue with liberals, and I've never been a liberal. The thing is, I grew up in a family that basically believed if anybody could do something if you just were willing to work hard enough. I mean, and that sounds like some people say you weren't looking at, you had the white skin, you automatically had immediate entree to every place you wanted, which is not really accurate, really isn't. A lot of black leaders and also a lot of liberal whites have a tendency to think that all white people are just waiting to meet each other and network. It's not the case, okay? They have opposition. But anyway, I always thought that was kind of an arrogance on the behalf of the white liberals that met in college, that they thought they had a right to, no, they don't understand the full ramifications of this. Like, well, why don't you explain it to them? And then you could see them to explain it to people and like, yeah, but they had the people they're talking to would say, well, this happens and this happened and okay, I'm okay with this. But they just couldn't accept that. The white liberal could not accept that some people didn't really have an issue.
Yeah, it's because the liberals want to inject themselves into these racial conversations because they have to, seemingly psychologically, they have to have something that employs their moral sensibilities. And I just think the problem has been mislabeled. Racism as a impediment has also been misdiagnosed in terms of its past stopping of blacks. When it was a problem in the past, it was a problem because of the racism of the Democratic Party. And these are not just my ideas, these are the ideas of Perriman, who's written a book about it. And when we look at the civil rights movement of Dr. King, for example, we see that this movement was basically a movement directed at the Democratic Party in the South. We can claim there was something different from that, but what Dr. King was trying to do was modify the behavior of Democrats. And don't forget that the Democratic Party is a party of the Ku Klux Klan that was set up by a person that came out of the Confederacy named Nathan Forrest, and that party was set up as a way of stopping blacks in the aftermath of the so-called Civil War. So I just simply take an exception to what I consider to be a lot of noise out here that's being made, and I think Facebook took some exception to what I wrote, but I documented everything that I said, and that may be the problem, because I think we are basically in this society right now a very irrational society. And we don't ask for the documentation. And just people out here spewing out a lot of, parroting kinds of ideas. And we don't want to look at the documentation. But I will declare in front of anybody, and I did that in front of the audiences on Facebook, that racism is not the major impediment that is affecting blacks. Liberalism is the major impediment today. And that goes against the grain. And for that, I was not able to post part 2 until I did it this morning. I had a friend to put part 2 up on the network. I waited 30 minutes I waited 30 days, by the way, for Facebook to do the reinstatement. I said after 30 days, if they go beyond that point, then I'm going to try to go around them to do part 2, and there'll be a part 3 tomorrow if they don't stop it, which will be the final post that I have on Facebook. Because what I plan to do, quite frankly, as a way of saying I don't need to be on that network if they don't want me on there, that's fine with me. I will do part 3 and finish up what I started to do a month ago, and that was I started a 3-part series. I'm going to complete that series, and then after that I can just simply go and do something else with my time.
I think you should start a website. I think, matter of fact, I had one guy call me last week, and just at the end of last week, and you know the guy, and I don't want to know, yeah, Dave Huffman, and he's got a lot of friends who are really wanting to hear what happened and all that about the banning, and so I mean, if you started your own website, we could promote that heavily, and I think that's what I think a lot of people would want to see, because that way you could post whatever you wanted to. You could put up a journal, you could have background information, or you could have like a small bio there about yourself.
I might consider that.
Yeah, because you might want to do that. Yeah, I think it would encourage.
Because I was posting every day on, I have a lot of, I like to write. And I celebrate my 12th grade English teacher, Mrs. Reed, so I do a lot of writing in her name. And I was just waiting to see what they were going to do, and if they are going to take exception to what I write and do not want to have respect for the First Amendment. If you have a point of view that is opposite the point of view that I'm putting across, and let's have a speech. What you do when you do not like speech, your dislike of speech should increase speech.
The First Amendment's totally destroyed now. I mean,
yes,
they got guidelines for what you could say. So they're telling people how they think, and then what they're going to do is they're going to create a festering situation. People are going to get, it's basically like something that's going to be like a boil, and it's going to be just keep on festering and festering and get bigger and bigger. Then it's going to pop, and it's not going to look pretty. And that thing is, when you try to silence all your opposition, you're going to have, so they're going to react. They're humans. They're going to react. They're getting tired of being shut out of the narrative. And guess what? They're going to react. It's not going to be pretty.
Well, that's what John, we had at the foundation of the country, we had the Constitution that was ratified in 1788. But in the ratification of it, they only did that if they had guarantees that later on they would come behind the ratification of what at that time was 7 articles that the Constitution was composed of. But they only ratified it with the understanding that they would come later on and they would add a Bill of Rights to it. And the 10 amendments that they added to it 3 years after the ratification in 1791, they wanted to make sure that they continued to restrain government, because the Constitution is a prohibition against government. Because what government does is that government is going to always be jealous of the freedoms of the people, because those freedoms threaten government. In other words, what the framers had to do was to find a way of constructing government in order to stop the bully. And then after you have set a mechanism up to stop the bully, you now have to do something to stop that which you set up to stop the bully. So what do you do then to restrain the government, which is the instrument you set up to stop the bully from being, from bullying the people individually? What do you do collectively to stop that? But in doing something to stop that collectively as a instrument, the instrument itself becomes a legal arm of the bully, and that's always what government has done. And it will never be different. And if you look around the world, you'll see it. Well, government is look in Zimbabwe. John, have you been watching what's going on in Zimbabwe right now?
I was going to bring that up because you usually try to concentrate United States current affairs, but Mugabe and stuff like that being forced out of power, and
he doesn't want to leave.
He's been in power 30 years
since 1980.
Yeah, so the country has gone backwards in many ways, right?
Zimbabwe before the takeover by Mugabe, Ian Smith was over there when it was called Zimbabwe. They had the country was called it was called Southern Rhodesia and Northern Rhodesia. Northern Rhodesia became Zambia, and Southern Rhodesia, which was named after Cecil B. Rhodes, Southern Rhodesia became Zimbabwe. So you had Zambia to the north, because there were two parts of you had 2 parts of Rhodesia. You had Southern Rhodesia and you had Northern Rhodesia. Northern Rhodesia became Zambia, and when it got its independence, the president there was Kenneth Kaunda. When the independence of Southern Rhodesia occurred in 1980, where Ian Smith was forced to stand down, then Mugabe took over in 1980, and then of course he got in there and became worse than Ian Smith. And they were telling him soon after he took power in 1980, worse than Smith. They were telling him he was worse than Smith. And that's what happens in these revolutions. You have persons coming down with the idea that they are going to rectify the problem of government. You see it here, Castro. He's going to come down from the mountain in 1959, and he's going to address the problems of Batista. And then Castro was worse than he was. Or look at Mao Zedong. He's going to come out the mountains in 1949, and he's going to correct the problems of Chiang Kai-shek in China. And what did Mao do? Mao Zedong went into China. He is worse than the person he replaced. And you have to always watch that. And we are fighting over here to replace King George III and fought a revolution. Well, they claim it was a revolutionary war. It was a war of secession. We fought from 1776 It's a War of Independence. We declared our independence, and we had to fight for it from 1776 to 1783. And when that occurred, we now have the responsibility of setting up government in place. But because Attila, see, all governments are run by Attila, and Attila has to be restrained. And so the framers are now, and this is what they're trying to do in Philadelphia, they now are entrusted with setting up government. And you have to do what? You have to make sure that in setting government up, you're not going to be setting it up in the image of the person you just got through setting down through picking up arms against King George III. You don't want to have a King George III over here, because all government is made up of Attilas. That's what government will always be, and it will never be different. I keep saying this, and I'll say it again here. That's a mistake that Lord Acton made in the 19th century. He thought, and he did say, that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. That's not true. Power is an inanimate object. It doesn't have power to do one thing or another. It's the use of the power. A stick doesn't have the power to beat anybody. It's an inanimate object. And unless you pick the stick up and use it to hit somebody, it doesn't have any use in terms of the abuse of it, unless it's abused by its standard bearer. Somebody has to pick it up and then use it in an abusive way.
That's an interesting thing to talk about. Power to me is always, the idea of power has always intrigued me. As a kid, one time I saw, was at Gerald Ford. He was coming down the steps of a plane, and they had the podium set up right at the end of it. And he had all these people surrounding him. They're paying the, hail to the chief and all this. And I always wondered why people this was at the end of the World War, the Vietnam War, because Nixon resigned, Ford became president. Mm-hmm. And yet when guys would go from their meeting, they'd get a notice on paper in a mail that they had to go some report for they're drafted, and they're just willingly just put themselves in, go into the line, get checked out by the medical officers or whatever to go in there, and we allowed ourselves we allow these people to have power over our lives. Mm-hmm. and then when I got into high school and stuff, they talk about social contract and all this stuff. Well, I never seen that social contract, nor have I ever signed my name on it, so maybe that's a leave. But I like to see, that's the examination of what is power. I mean, it is an inanimate object, but it does seem, and even if you got people who are benevolent exercising it, you got people out there who are now, they come to you with the urgent need and the desire for you to help as a decent human being that you might be, who has got immense power now. That could be corruption, but I always wondered about power, why we allow ourselves to be subjugated to that.
I got past the idea that these benevolent philosophers that pursued power a long time ago. I read The Republic when I was in college. And you can be very naive about who the people that pursue power. What I have come to understand after having read, and this is what Plato was raising, this idea that you would have the the greatest good for the greatest many, and those that are pursuing power are doing so in order to do the greatest good for the greatest number. And that is not why people pursue power. People pursue power because they want to, first of all, get away from the regulations they're putting on everyone else. And they also want to be influential in the lives of others and take away the sovereignty of other people. So this idea that you're running as a civil servant, there's certainly the writings that have been put in place that politicians have had. They're very clever. They have disguised themselves in terms of the idea that these are benevolent, dictators or benevolent civil servants.
That's exactly it, public servant. But then if you look at their pay,
serving themselves.
Look at their checking account. I got $75 to my name till next payday. This guy's got $230 million, and he's been nothing but a public servant. Well, I think he's been serving his own interests first, okay? Because I'm certainly not getting any real benefit of it,
John, you can look at it from the standpoint of the congressmen, the congresspersons. In America, in the general population, 1% of the American people are millionaires. Now, in the Congress, there are half of the persons that are in Congress that are millionaires. So either the people that are running for office and become members of Congress are 50 times smarter than the people in the general population, or something is going on in the Congress that has nothing to do with service, but with something else underneath the table that's causing that phenomenon to exist.
Another thing, and you call it a dilemma, because if you got an honest person, but he or she doesn't take advantage of the offerings that they have, so they can actually make it and better their own position in life as a politician, then you're saying either they're idiots or they're so like stuck in this good mode that they're almost unbelievable, which is almost an impossibility for actually anybody to attain. So I mean, you got people who, if they forego all the stuff that didn't partake of that stuff was coming at them, they're idiots. But if they do it, then they're corrupt. So I mean, it's kind of a dilemma.
Yeah.
You're saying, gee, like Bernie Sanders, his supporters would say he doesn't have as much as your other senators and congressmen. Well, he's been in power for a long time, so either he's a total idiot, but he's still's got enough to say that he's more than everybody else around him because he's got 3 houses. So I mean, so should I honor him and respect him because he's this honest person, or should I say he's an idiot because he didn't take the opportunities when he had a chance? Which one is it?
Yeah, the members of Congress, if they were good at handling money, we would not have a $20 trillion at this point in time of a national debt. In other words, they're spending $3.27 trillion a year of taxpayers' money, and they still can't make the balance the budget. And they have $20 trillion of unfunded liabilities out there where they've charged a credit card debt to the nation. So I can't attribute their being millionaires, 50% of them being millionaires, to the handling of money, because look at what they've done to the federal treasury.
By the way,
they don't handle our money very well.
And we missed the opportunity to stop at 26 minutes, for the break. But so we'll have to welcome them back at 30 minutes. So we'll just talk now until 30 minutes is up, and up to 30 minutes, and then I'll play the music again. But I saw that we went past 26 minutes. So
sorry about that.
Yeah.
Because we want to definitely appreciate the audience. They'll take their break anyway, whether we introduce it or not. How did you want to proceed with that?
That's what I'll just say. I'll just play the music at 30 minutes and the 30-minute mark, and then welcome back
from the break.
Right. That's my fault. I just got too caught up in talking myself.
Okay.
But anyway,
I don't think we'll welcome back in about 3 or 4 minutes from WFOV. I do not think that the people that run the government are any smarter than the American people. And in fact, there's no evidence that they are even on the same level as the American people as a collective. But they interfere with the things that are going on inside the countries if they are more aware and more intellectually gifted than the American people by running interference and everything. But if you look at the Constitution in terms of how the framers saw the American people and saw the leadership, you'll see that it was the opposite view, that the American people should be the ones that are in charge of the affairs of the nation, and you restrict the access to power of those that are running government. And you see that in terms of how they separate the power of these people in government. They have the check and balance system, and they had the Confederacy, where they put power on different levels. So much power in the federal government, and then so much power on the state level. And they just tried to take power out of their hands. And in Article 1, Section 4, Clause 2, they said there that Congress shall meet at least once a year, meaning that they did not see Congress as having to meet on a regular basis as they're doing right now. They should meet at least once a year. What they need to do, if they're going to amend the Constitution in that regard, is to say that they should only meet once a year. Because the more they meet, guess how much of your liberty is being taken in their meeting in Washington. And we welcome them back at this point, those who took a break from WFOV, and we're glad to have you back. We have not left too far from where we were when you took your break at the 26-minute mark, and we will not make that mistake next time in terms of not introducing that break.
Yeah, somebody helped me. I was too busy talking. Somebody stopped me. I was too busy talking myself.
Yes, and we definitely appreciate the listeners at WFOV. I do want to make the point, though, that it's not power that corrupts. Lord Acton made a crucial mistake in terms of the analogy, because he saw people in power, and probably throughout history, saw the abuse of power by those that were in the the power centers of government, but it's not power that corrupts. What Lord Acton did not see was what the philosopher, the Canadian philosopher named Stefan Molyneux, has come up with, and he's correct in in his analysis, and that is a kind of people that pursue power. Lord Acton did not consider the kinds of people that want to run a government, that want to operate and become influential through the operation of state power.
He was a lord. He was actually a lord in the British government, right?
In the British Parliament.
He was the House of Lords, right?
In the House of Lords.
Right.
And, there's one way to be influential, but the best way and the most virtuous way to be influential is to be influential by providing something that people will voluntarily want to associate with and have a prerogative of doing it or not doing it, and you have influence because you're creating a product that people desire and they want to trade with you, and you are influential because you are providing something that people want and are willing to pay you for.
See, I'm having a disagreement with this guy online right now, and he's saying basically he's going on about the taxation and how the rich aren't paying their fair share. And he had this video that he posted that had millionaires saying they weren't paying their fair share, and I responded to that. And I said, well, if you want to change, then he was reacting to my reaction, and basically we were talking about tax code, and I'm saying change the tax code, and he comes back with me like, oh, you want to keep the same tax code? I said change the tax code, and I mean it's like politicians who say, look, the rich are not paying their fair share are often the same ones sitting on the ones who create the tax code. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's so disingenuous for them to say, look at the rich getting away with this when they're creating the means for them to do so.
Yeah, and that person is brainwashed. Let me ask a question of that person. He says that they're not paying their fair share. The question then is, how much of the money that when you went on your job belongs to the government or belongs to someone else? And it's what Walter Williams says at George Mason University, the economist over there, that says how much of the money that a person makes in their job belongs to someone else, and then tell me why it belongs to that person. You see, the brainwashing is that they say the rich are not paying their fair share. That's wrong on two levels. On the primary level is the statement is false. The rich are paying 70% of the taxes in this country. The top 1% are paying 38% of the taxes, almost 40%. The top 5% of the taxpayers, I'm talking about the income earners, the top 5%, the ones that make that are in the 5% income bracket, they pay 60% of the taxes. And the top 10%, which will include the 1%, the 5%, and then you go to the top 10%, which includes those other two groups, they're paying 70% of the taxes. So then 90% of the population are paying only 30% of the taxes in this country, and the bottom 40% are not paying any taxes.
And I think it's interesting. The people complaining about everybody else not paying their fair share are people who want something from that tax base. That's the reason why you're not paying enough, because I'm not getting enough because you're not paying enough towards me. Yeah. And it's that expectation that somebody should owe them something is like really bizarre to me. I don't understand they can come up with that.
Let me ask you a question, John. Why do you think that the bottom 50% are exempted from paying federal income taxes?
Probably, let's face it, they do get tax breaks. They complain about tax breaks from the rich. They're getting tax breaks. They're getting exemptions. They're getting allowances, the earned income credit thing. They're getting money they never earned handed back to them in many instances. So, what would you say was the answer?
Charles Adams has a book out called "Those Dirty Rotten Taxes." We have been fighting ever since we got over here wars against taxation. We had a taxation war in 1776. We had a taxation war in 1791. You can hide it and say it's a whiskey rebellion. John, they call it a whiskey rebellion.
What is it about? Because
it's a tax rebellion.
Well, the thing is, I can see what I mean. I can't conceive of a country without taxation. We have to have it to function government. But
here's my point though. Yeah, you do need taxation. but you don't need taxation to the point of it being confiscation.
One other thing is, too, it's like, why don't we start talking about what we should actually be okay, I know this is going to go against a lot of Republicans and Democrats, but do we always have to be in everybody's face militarily? I mean, how many nations in the world are there exist, and we're in the largest portion? I mean, I think there's only like 5 nations that we're not in military presence. Mm-hmm. And another thing is all these prolonged wars. We start wars with no objective in mind, no goals in mind, really, just to keep the peace, which is real vague or whatever. And actually, it's not keeping peace. People are getting killed, so I thought peace means lack of deaths. But anyway, we keep on doing that. And yeah, we could cut scale back on the military, but then the rest of the world becomes screaming, "You're not doing enough to protect us from ourselves."
Yes.
So where are you bringing it in at?
Ayn Rand made the point that it doesn't take that much money to run a government, but when you have a government that is in fact bloated with 2 million persons, the federal government is larger than any corporation in this country. There are only 2.4 million persons working for Walmart, the largest employer in the United States, and the federal government is equivalent to that. And you have the government made up of the Congress, that's 535 members. You got 9 members of the Supreme Court. You got the President's Cabinet that's made up of 16 different departments. And so where does this 2 million workforce come from? And then they said when they had the government shutdown, they said that they had 800,000 employers that were unnecessary, and they laid them off during what they call the shutdown. The government never shut down. You don't shut the government down, but they were saying that there was a government shutdown, meaning that they had to skim back. Soon as the money started flowing again, by them raising the debt ceiling, really the shutdown was just the fact that they had run out of the taxpayers' money, and they raised the debt ceiling, which they're going to do that every time that they get to the debt ceiling, they raise it again. And you simply pay the bills off through the creation of debt. And this country runs on 85% debt. 85%, if you go to the store, most of the persons doing their transactions in those stores, they're not paying cash, they're paying with credit cards. So you pay. So the government so the country operates on debt. And in fact, when they ask this question on that commercial, what's in your wallet? It doesn't matter whether you have a credit card or you have the dollar bills. You're paying with debt. The dollar bill is debt. It's just that one debt was born into existence at the Federal Reserve Bank, and the other one is born in debt by you borrowing money into existence. And everything you're spending at those stores and your credit card, that money does not exist until it's borrowed into existence. In other words, it's a scam. The whole monetary system in this country is a scam. And so is it a scam in terms of the international monetary system. All of it running upon fiat currency. But if they were handling money so well, and if they were so good at managing money, and that would justify why they're millionaires, 50% of them in the Congress are millionaires, then why is it they can't manage the money of the public? And they act like they're doing us a favor right now in Washington by debating whether or not they're going to give people a tax break. In other words, to reduce the amount of theft that they are involved in, because they're not asking people to pay taxes. They're telling you if you either pay or you go to jail.
And that's what this guy brought up about the IRS, and he says, "Oh, I have to fear the IRS." Yeah, if you're in your right mind, you're going to fear the IRS.
You're going to fear the IRS. They got 90,000 workers up there, and their job is to harass you, so that if you do not, in fact, give them your money, the government's not asking you to pay tax; they're telling you will, in fact, pay, and you'll pay whether you agree with the policies or not.
Right. I mean, it's like, and he was like basically
it's confiscation of your wealth.
And this guy's just, I would like to see how it's end, but he keeps on going on about I want the same the tax code, and I said, where did you get that at? I didn't say. I said change the tax code, eliminate large portions of it. It's an easy fix, but let's face it, it's not an easy fix because the politicians got everybody else now needing your money to go to that system so they can get the vote from giving your money to somebody else. They're holding a gun to your head, and now they're passing that money over to somebody else, and then they're expecting people who the money is being extracted from not to rebel.
Government is a gun, and they don't see the gun in the room, but try to resist what government says will be the ordination of events. If government says that the taxes will be paid at this rate, then that is what has to happen. And if it doesn't happen, then you have the next, then you see the guns, because government is force, and the taxation is confiscation of wealth. And they are debating right now in Washington whether or not they will give people their money back, and people are saying they're not paying their fair share. Give me a break. How much? What is the fair share of the money that you should give to the robber on the street when he comes to you with a gun and says stick them up and get your hands up in the air? What is his fair share? He says all of it in your pocket is his fair share. But if they did that with government, then you would do the same thing you would do out there. You would, in fact, arm yourself to stop the confiscation. And that answers the question I asked earlier. I was asking about why is it that 50% of the people at the bottom tier are exempted from paying taxes. You see the game that there is that if you can get most of the taxes from the 1%, the 5%, and the 10%, they don't have the numbers to object. If you put those taxes down there at the bottom 50%, and you squeeze that part of the population even more, and having problems paying their bill, you'll have what you've had in this country ever since 1776. Why did they rise up? And this idea that they rose up because of they were being taxed without representation, that's another non-starter, another clever disguised lie that they're telling. They rose up because of taxation, period.
Yeah, it's like,
it wasn't taxation with representation. Was taxation was the issue.
Okay, some people could argue, and probably rightly so, that since they were facing the wrath of the Native American tribes, because of their encroachment, the British government put troops over here in defense of that, and that was coming from the government funds of England. So I guess they can justify that, like they're doing now. They're forcing us to do stuff though that we don't have we're not going to enjoy any benefit of, but they're going to tell us to serve the greater good. Yeah, it's really questionable if it's for the greater good. We got to now submit ourselves to higher taxation and with limited freedoms, because we got to fight this great war on stuff, war on terror, war on drugs, whatever. We got to surrender all this money and all our rights so they can win this war, which is never attainable. Never attainable.
This history has been written so as to hide the issues in this war. This is not a revolutionary war. The war that they had a revolution in was the war in France that occurred in 1789. It's not a revolutionary war. It's a war of secession, and the secession war is won over taxation. John, you're raising a point here that I need to do. You're making a good point. I need to clarify a little bit about some more aspects of that point, and that is that it was reasonable for the British to say that during what was called the French and Indian War, if you dated from the time it's dated, like in France dated this war in 1754, and they called it the 9 Years' War because it would be from 1754 to 1763. We call it the 7 Years' War here. The French and Indian War. We call it the 7 Years' War here because we date this war in 56, and we dated from 1756 to 1763, and we want this war. What the British are asking them is that to keep those troops in America, there's a cost involved in it, and they want the colonists to pay that tax for that defense. They objected to that. So this is not about representation, and then they're objecting to taxes because they're not represented. They didn't think they had to pay any taxes, period, because they had come over here to get away from taxation. I mean, they can say they came here for religious freedom. They came here to get away from taxation, and they're objecting to any taxes because the money they made, they wanted to have the right to keep the money they made. And you can't do that when you have government. And they fought the war to get rid of that. And I make this claim also, and I can prove this by the fact that this war that started in 1861 in this country, this secession movement that started on December the 20th, it started really in 1860. December the 20th, 1860. We had the election November the 6th, 1860. Lincoln was elected. In December of that year, December the 20th, South Carolina secedes from the Union. And what was the objection they had? They want to say it was an objection to slavery. Give me a break. They had slavery in the Union states. This is not a war over slavery. The problem that the historians have here, and I'm going to correct it right now, this objection, you see, the problem the historians have there is that because slavery's ending point was a result of the war, they then think it was a cause of the war. It's not a cause of the war. Lincoln gave them 100 days to come back into the Union with the Emancipation Proclamation that was in fact threatened in September 22nd, 1862, Lincoln threatened to have the Emancipation Proclamation. And he said that if the South did not come back into the Union within 100 days, then the proclamation that had been threatened to be put into existence on January 1 of the following year would be put into existence. And they did not come back into the Union. If it had been over slavery, they would have come back into the Union because slavery was not going to be allowed to be outside of the Union, but inside the Union, slavery was in fact safe. It's not a war over slavery. It's a war over taxation. It's not even a civil war. It's a war that is being fought for succession. They are trying to succeed from the Union as had happened in 1776, and they're mimicking the same thing in this war 74 years later, 74 years after the Constitution had been drawn up. So from 1787 to 1861, 74 years later, this experiment was falling apart, and now the South is standing up again over the taxation issue. And you say, well, why would it be a taxation issue in 1861? It is because the South is objecting to the way the taxation was playing out in this country. So you didn't have an income tax at this point. You had a tariff at this point. And what the South is objecting to is that the way the tariff operated is that the federal government is putting a taxation on goods imported into the country. That helps the manufacturers out in the northern states, that you're protecting the manufacturing base of the country. But what happens if you have goods imported to the country and you put a tax on it, the tariff, which allows the federal government to pay its bills, then who is paying for that tariff there with those goods coming in? The South is paying for it. Why? Because when the South exports its goods, then where is exporting the goods to those countries, they are now putting a tariff on the cotton crop. And what I'm saying here is then, in that relationship, the South is actually paying for the prosperity of the North. This is what the historians have missed in terms of talking about this war is over slavery. This war is not over slavery. This war is over tariff. This war is a taxation war. And the South is rising up against it because they are now recognizing that the South, through the circular way in which the taxation structures is playing out in the tariff policies of the country, they're paying for the prosperity of the North, and they're objecting to it. And Lincoln is not going to allow this cash cow to leave out of this country. And when they say this war is over taxation, is not over taxation but over slavery, then how do you explain then that they are slaves in the northern states? Those states that had slavery in the Union states, they had slavery there too. They had slavery in Delaware. They had slaves in Maryland. They had slaves in Kentucky. And they had slaves in Missouri. And those are all Union states. You can have that fact by calling them border states. Well, every state borders another state. Otherwise, if they didn't have borders you have borders on the states and you have borders around the nation. You're supposed to. Because if you don't have borders, then you don't have states. And if you have borders around the country, you don't have a country. And they're going to talk about border states, but that's just another clever disguise in terms of, okay, they were the border states part of the Union, or were the border states part of the Confederacy? And I said, and I've been saying this for a while, and nobody else is saying it, so because it's not popular, but it is factual. You didn't have a civil war in this country. You have two nations fighting against each other. You have the Union, the Union of the Union states. That's a country made up of 22 states. You have 11 states that have succeeded, and they set up the Confederate States of the United States, the Confederate States of America, the Confederate States of America, the CSA. You got two nations going to war here. And one of the problems, quite frankly, that the South made, because when the Confederate States were set up, the Confederate States were set up in Montgomery. In other words, where King would start the civil rights movement in 1955, King didn't start it, but it was started by E.D. Nixon. But King will eventually become the head of the movement. Once the boycott started, then King is going to set up the SCLC. First of all, they had the MIA, the Montgomery Improvement Association. Then it became the SCLC that took over the reins of it and then enlarged upon it, where it stopped just being in a Montgomery situation, but it became a Southern-based organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. That was in Montgomery, Alabama. And Montgomery was where you had the Confederates that was set up there. The mistake they made there was that they were trying to show the northern states that both countries could coexist side by side, and they need not be enemies of each other. And so they moved the Confederacy from Montgomery, Alabama, moved it to Richmond, Virginia, next door to Washington, D.C., with the idea that we can coexist and be peaceful on this land space, and the two nations could coexist with each other. And that was a mistake that they made, because now that the Union states see that if they can conquer Richmond, their thinking is they can just conquer the capital of the Confederacy, they can end this war. But this war is not over slavery, and if they had come back into the Union without prior to January 1st, 1863, they could have come in with their slaves. And none of the slaves with the Emancipation Proclamation signed into existence by Abraham Lincoln, none of the slaves in the Union states were affected by it.
Even Barack Obama, when he was campaigning before first run as for president, he actually said in an interview, I heard him say that, about Lincoln, and he said, I don't think basically he did all that much. He actually said you have freedom to a bunch of slaves who actually are in territories that the federal government at that time didn't control. So, he was right about that part.
He's right about that part, and there's a book out called The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Civil War, written by a guy named, a writer by the name of Crockett. And Crockett, on the front cover of his book, says things you may not know about the Civil War. And one of the things you may not know is that, first of all, there was no Civil War, and then number two, that the Emancipation Proclamation did not free a single slave. You are creating an Emancipation Proclamation to free the slaves in the Confederate States, and there's a war going on. Let's have the American government to pass a law to free the slaves in Mauritania or in Sudan. How would that work out? He wouldn't free any slaves. And the Emancipation Proclamation was to reach into the states that were fighting against the Union states, and here's Lincoln saying the slaves in the Confederate states, in the country, the Confederate country, those slaves will be freed, but the ones in the Union, there's nothing that the Emancipation Proclamation touched. And I don't think Lincoln was being hypocritical about that, because in his inaugural address, the one that he gave on March the 4th, 1861, Lincoln said that he had no constitutional authority to free the slaves. And he said he has no inclination to free the slaves, because the South had not yet, the shooting between the two had not started yet, because Fort Sumter is not going to happen until April the 12th, the month after the inauguration of the President of the United States. When Lincoln was inaugurated, Lincoln took the inaugural address on March the 4th of 1861. Fort Sumter doesn't happen until April the 12th, the following month of 1861. And why did the South fire on Fort Sumter? Because the negotiations to end the federal fort in South Carolina, in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina, that fort now is on foreign soil. And South Carolina is negotiating with the Lincoln administration to have the federal government to relinquish that fort, which they had done in all the other Confederate states, except in Florida, where they had what's that fort called in Florida, and they had the fort in South Carolina. There's only 2 forts that they had not surrendered. And when Lincoln did not relinquish that fort, because he's goading them into firing on it, because Lincoln cannot start this war unless the aggressors was looked at as the South, because if Lincoln had tried to militarily defend the fort, he would have lost some of those other states, because they understood what South Carolina understands, and that is they had a right to succeed. It's another point that Crockett is making in his book, is that the South had the right to succeed. So no civil war. The Emancipation Proclamation did not free any slaves, and secession was in fact legal. Now that's a lot to chew on, but those are the facts. And this idea of paying taxes and that you're not paying your fair share, those persons are saying that are brainwashed, because the federal government didn't even have the right to tax direct taxation in the country until the 16th Amendment, which was passed in 1913. So how did the government pay its bills prior to that? They paid it through the tariff, and they paid it through the selling of land. Okay, we got to get out of here. Hope you have a nice Thanksgiving, and don't forget to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.